I stood in the hospital corridor, heart pounding, staring at an empty room where my dying father was supposed to be. My phone still buzzed with Clara's tearful voicemail from 3 a.m., begging me to rush home from Paris because Dad had suffered a massive heart attack. I'd abandoned my fashion career, drained my savings for a one-way ticket, and flown across an ocean, only to find no trace of him in Riverside General. The nurse's words echoed. No William Carter was ever admitted. My family's desperate lie unraveled before me, and I realized this wasn't about love or loss. It was about the $5.6 million inheritance I'd receive in 3 weeks. They thought they could manipulate the dutiful daughter they remembered. They were wrong. The Sophie who left New Hampshire 5 years ago was gone. Now, I'd play the game, and win. They'd faked my father's death to lure me back. Their mistake wasn't the lie or the grotesque manipulation of my grief. It was underestimating me. They taught me blood means nothing when money's at stake. Now, I'd teach them the daughter they tried to control had learned the tricks, and I was playing to win. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the darkness of my Paris apartment, jerking me from sleep at 3:17 a.m. I fumbled for it, squinting at the screen. Clara, my sister, never called, especially not at this hour. Hello. My voice was thick with sleep. Sophie. Oh God, Sophie. Clara's voice cracked, punctuated by what sounded like sobbing. It's Dad. He's had a heart attack, a bad one. They don't know if he's going to make it. My body went cold as I sat up, suddenly wide awake. What? When? Is he in surgery? They rushed him to Riverside General an hour ago. Mom's a wreck. Ethan is with her, but Dad was asking for you before they took him back. Her voice broke again. The doctor said we should prepare for the worst. You need to come home, Sophie, now. I was already out of bed, switching on lights, my mind racing. Dad had always been healthy. Tennis 3 times a week, annual physicals, the occasional bourbon his only vice. But he was 63 now, and heart attacks didn't discriminate. I'll be on the next flight, I promised, my throat tight. Tell him to hang on, okay? Tell him I'm coming. After hanging up, I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what was happening. Then I was moving, throwing clothes into a suitcase, calling airlines, my hands shaking so badly I had to redial twice. 4 hours later, I was standing in my design studio, explaining the situation to Beatrice, my mentor and boss at Laurent Fashion House. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the half-finished designs for the upcoming showcase. My showcase, the one that could finally cement my place in Paris's competitive fashion world after 3 years of relentless work. Family emergency, I said. Beatrice's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose as she looked at my packed suitcase. Sophie, the Dubois presentation is in 5 days. We've committed to delivering the fall-spring collection. Do you understand what you're jeopardizing? My father might be dying, I said, my voice breaking. I have to go. Beatrice's expression softened slightly. Of course you do. But I can't hold your position on this project. When you return, if you return, we'll have to re-evaluate. Translation. I was throwing away everything I'd worked for. But what choice did I have? I understand, I said, though the words felt like glass in my mouth. The journey to New Hampshire was a blur of airport terminals, overpriced coffee, and anxiety. I drained my savings account for a last-minute business class ticket, the only seat available, and spent the flight alternating between troubled sleep and frantic attempts to reach someone at Riverside General. Strangely, no one seemed able to connect me to my father's room or provide updates on his condition. During my layover in Boston, my phone pinged with a text from Agnes, our elderly neighbor who'd been like a second mother to me growing up. Be careful, Sophie. Things aren't what they seem. I immediately called her back, heart pounding, but a man's voice answered, her son, apparently, saying she was resting and couldn't come to the phone. When I pressed for details, he hung up. As the plane descended toward New Hampshire, memories of my complicated family dynamics surfaced. Dad had always been my champion, encouraging my design dreams even when Mom thought fashion was a waste of my real potential. He'd stood up for me when I'd announced I was moving to Paris, while Ethan and Clara had accused me of abandoning the family business, Carter Real Estate, a modest company that had provided a comfortable living but never inspired passion in me. Then there was the matter of Grandpa Carter's inheritance. Unlike my siblings, who had received their shares of his estate immediately after his death, mine had been placed in a trust that would mature on my 30th birthday, just 3 weeks away. The strange condition: I would only receive it if I pursued a career outside the family business. To ensure at least one Carter breaks the mold, Grandpa had written in his will a final vote of confidence that had simultaneously warmed my heart and driven a wedge between me and my siblings. Ethan was waiting at baggage claim, his tall frame easy to spot. My brother had always been handsome in that preppy New Hampshire way. Sandy hair, strong jaw, perpetually tanned from golf, but something seemed off about his appearance today. His expression was somber, yet his eyes lacked the redness of recent tears. "Soph." He hugged me stiffly. "Thank God you're here. How's Dad? Has there been any change?" I asked immediately, searching his face. Ethan hesitated just a beat too long. "It's touch and go. The doctors are doing everything they can. I want to go straight to the hospital," I insisted as he grabbed my suitcase and started walking toward the exit. "Of course," he said, but his pace slowed. "Though Mom was hoping you might drop by the house first to freshen up. The whole family is gathered there for support." The whole family? I frowned. Our extended family was scattered across the East Coast. "How bad is it, Ethan?" "Let's just get you to the car," he said, avoiding my eyes. As we drove through town, I noticed significant changes since my last visit. New developments bearing the Carter Real Estate logo stood where family farms had once sprawled. A shopping complex now occupied what had been Peterson's orchard. Ethan followed my gaze and smiled slightly. "Impressive, right? We've expanded considerably in the last 2 years. Dad's vision has really transformed this place. It must have required significant investment," I observed. Ethan's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "We've had some very supportive investors." When we pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, a colonial-style house that had been in the family for generations, I was surprised to see several expensive cars parked outside. One I recognized as belonging to Leonard Prescott, our family's attorney. "Why is Leonard here? And is that Uncle Victor's Porsche?" I asked. "Everyone's rallied around Mom during this difficult time," Ethan said vaguely. "Let's go inside first. Then I'll take you to the hospital." "No," I said firmly, unclicking my seatbelt. "Hospital first. I've been trying to get information about Dad's condition for nearly 24 hours now, and no one will tell me anything concrete. I need to see him." Ethan sighed. "Fine." Riverside General was a 15-minute drive, passed in uncomfortable silence. When we arrived, Ethan led me to the cardiac care unit with a confidence that suggested he'd been here multiple times in the past day. But when we approached the nurse's station, the charge nurse looked confused. "Room 417, Ethan told her. "William Carter." The nurse frowned, typing into her computer. "I'm sorry, we don't have any patient by that name." "That's impossible," Ethan insisted. "He was admitted yesterday. Heart attack." "Sir, I've been on shift since yesterday afternoon. We haven't admitted anyone named Carter, and room 417 has been empty since Tuesday." I turned to my brother, whose face had drained of color. "Ethan, what's going on?" "There must be some mistake," he stammered. "Maybe they moved him to another hospital." I asked coldly, the pieces starting to click together. Agnes's cryptic warning, the avoided questions, Leonard's car in our driveway. "Let's go back to the house," Ethan said, his voice low. "I can explain everything. Is Dad even sick?" I demanded, loud enough that several people in the waiting area turned to look. Ethan grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit. "Not here, Sophie. Get your hands off me," I yanked away from him. "Tell me the truth right now, or I swear to God I will cause a scene you won't believe." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "Dad's not here," he admitted quietly. "He's at home. He had a minor health scare, not a full heart attack." We may have exaggerated the severity. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. "You lied to get me here. I gave up everything. We needed you to come home," Ethan interrupted, his voice urgent. "It's important, family important. I'll explain in the car." But he didn't explain, not really. The drive back was filled with vague statements about family duty and how I'd been away too long. By the time we pulled back into the driveway, my shock had hardened into fury. I stormed into the house ahead of Ethan, following the sound of voices to the dining room. There sat my family, not around a table set for a somber meal during a health crisis, but surrounded by documents and laptops. Mom, looking perfectly put together in her pearl earrings and cashmere sweater. Clara, whose tearful phone call had sent me racing across an ocean, now calmly sipping coffee. Leonard, the lawyer, reviewing papers. And Dad, my supposedly critical, possibly dying father, standing by the window with a tumbler of bourbon, looking as robust as he had at Christmas 2 years ago. They all froze when I entered, a tableau of guilt. Sophie, Dad recovered first, setting down his drink and moving toward me with arms outstretched. Sweetheart, you're home. I stepped back, avoiding his embrace. Don't you dare. Mom stood, smoothing her slacks. Sophie, I know you must be confused. Confused? I'm not confused. I'm furious. You lied to me. You made me think Dad was dying. We needed you to come home, Clara said, as if that explained everything. For what? What was so important that you had to fabricate a medical emergency? The family exchanged glances, and Leonard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should all sit down, Dad suggested. Have some lunch, and we can explain everything calmly. I don't want lunch. I want the truth. Now. Dad sighed. There was a situation developing with the family business. We needed to discuss it with you in person, not over the phone. A situation so dire it justified making me think you were on your deathbed. We may have overreacted, Mom admitted, not looking particularly remorseful. But, Sophie, we were worried about you, all alone in Paris. It's time you came home where you belong, especially with your birthday coming up. My birthday, and with it, access to my inheritance. This is about the money, isn't it? I said slowly, the realization dawning. Grandpa's trust. The momentary flicker in Dad's eyes confirmed it before he could mask it with fatherly concern. This is about family, he countered, about securing the Carter legacy that your grandfather worked so hard to build. Now, why don't you go upstairs, rest a bit, and we'll have a proper family dinner tonight to discuss everything. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to book the next flight back to Paris. Instead, I nodded stiffly and headed upstairs to my old bedroom, which looked unnervingly unchanged since high school, as if preserved in amber waiting for my return. Once alone, I sank onto the edge of the bed, trembling with rage and hurt. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at Joe's Diner at 9 p.m. Come alone, Soph. Agnes. I now understood her warning. Dinner was an excruciating exercise in pretense. Mom had prepared my favorite childhood meal, pot roast with roasted potatoes, clearly part of the manipulation strategy. The conversation remained superficial, though I caught significant glances exchanged between my parents whenever the topic veered toward my life in Paris or my upcoming birthday. After dinner, Dad invited everyone for brandy in his study, but I begged exhaustion and jet lag. No one protested too much. They probably wanted to strategize without me present anyway. In my room, I changed into jeans and a dark sweater, then slipped out the back door at 8:45. Joe's Diner was within walking distance, a 24-hour establishment that had barely changed since my high school days. Agnes sat in a corner booth, her silver hair neatly styled as always, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. At 78, she remained sharp-eyed and formidable, a retired English teacher who had taught generations of Carter children and never minced words with any of us. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said as I slid into the booth. I almost didn't, I admitted. What's going on, Agnes? Why did they really bring me home? The waitress appeared, and I ordered coffee, waiting until she departed before leaning forward. They faked a heart attack, Agnes. Who does that? Desperate people, she replied, her voice low. Your family's in trouble, Sophie. Serious trouble. Financial trouble. She nodded. The company expanded too fast. Your father leveraged everything on some developments that aren't working out. Now the investors are getting nervous, loans are being called in, and there are whispers about it. I thought of the new buildings bearing our name, the expensive cars, Ethan's evasiveness about financing. And they need my inheritance to bail them out. Bingo. Agnes reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded newspaper, sliding it across the table. It was a business section from 3 months ago, featuring a small headline: Carter Developments faces investor lawsuit. Construction halted on Bayside project. This is just the tip of the iceberg, Agnes continued. I've been watching them scramble for months. Your mother's been selling her jewelry, your father's golf club membership is suddenly on hold, and Ethan's been making some very strange new friends, the kind that charge interest rates that don't exactly align with banking regulations. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew. Because your grandfather was my friend, and he set up that trust the way he did for a reason. Her eyes, faded blue but still intense, held mine. William was always too reckless, too eager to expand without proper foundations. Henry, your grandfather, feared what would happen if William ever got control of the entire family fortune. That's why he protected your portion. The coffee arrived, and I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, trying to process everything. So what do I do? That depends, Agnes said. Do you want to save your family, or save yourself? I barely slept that night, Agnes's question echoing in my mind. By morning, I had decided on a strategy. I would appear to cooperate while gathering information. I needed to understand exactly what my family was planning before I could decide how to respond. At breakfast, I apologized for my overreaction the previous day, explaining that the shock and jet lag had gotten the better of me. The relief on their faces would have been comical if the situation weren't so disturbing. We understand completely, sweetheart, Mom said, squeezing my hand. We should have been more sensitive about how we brought you home. I'm just glad Dad's okay, I replied with practiced sincerity. And I'm here now, so let's talk about what's really going on. Dad exchanged a glance with Mom before clearing his throat. After breakfast, Leonard is coming over to explain some opportunities for the family business. Opportunities where your participation would be particularly valuable. My participation? I repeated. Or my inheritance? Another glance between my parents. Both, Dad admitted. Your grandfather's trust is about to mature, and the timing couldn't be more perfect for a significant investment in the family business. Perfect for whom? I wondered but kept the thought to myself. Leonard arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, briefcase in hand, his balding head shining under the dining room chandelier as he spread documents across the table. The family lawyer had always reminded me of a turtle, slow-moving, deliberate, with small eyes that rarely blinked. Sophie, wonderful to see you, he greeted me with professional warmth. I understand there was some confusion about why you were called home, but I assure you, this is a matter of great importance to your family's future. So I've gathered, I said. Leonard launched into what sounded like a well-rehearsed presentation about the exciting growth of Carter Real Estate and its expansion into development projects. According to him, the company had temporarily overextended its resources pursuing opportunities that would ultimately yield tremendous returns. What was needed now was a strategic influx of capital to bridge the company through this momentary liquidity challenge. And that's where your inheritance comes in, he concluded. The trust your grandfather established for you matures in 3 weeks, at which point you'll have access to approximately $5.6 million in liquid assets and property holdings. I tried not to show my surprise at the amount, far more than I'd realized. No wonder they were so desperate. We're proposing that you invest the full amount into Carter Developments as a family limited partner, Leonard continued. The papers I've prepared would transfer the assets directly from the trust into the company upon maturity. All of it? I asked. That seems rather extreme. The situation requires decisive action, Dad interjected. Half measures won't be sufficient. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering. I'd like some time to review the documents. Of course, Leonard smiled thinly, though we would need your commitment rather soon. There are time-sensitive matters at play. I'm sure there are, I murmured. After Leonard left, Ethan offered to take me on a tour of the company's developments, a transparent attempt to impress me with what my money would be supporting. I accepted, using the opportunity to ask seemingly innocent questions that revealed far more than Ethan realized about the company's precarious position. We drove past half-finished luxury condominiums where no workers were present, just waiting on some permit approvals, a shopping center with mostly empty storefronts, the anchor tenants are finalizing their contracts, and an office complex that looked suspiciously like it had been abandoned mid-construction, redesigning some elements to better serve the client's needs. "It looks like you've been busy," I observed as we pulled away from the last site. "How are all these projects being financed?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Various investors, banks, the usual channels. And these investors, they're happy with the progress." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel again. "There have been some delays, nothing unusual in development. Hence the need for my money. Your investment," he corrected quickly. "It's not like we're asking for a handout, Sophie. You'll be a full partner." "In what, exactly?" I wondered silently. That evening, Mom joined me in the kitchen as I made tea. For the first time, I noticed the strain around her eyes, the slight tremor in her usually steady hands. "Sophie," she began hesitantly, "I know yesterday was shocking, and I'm truly sorry about the deception, but you have to understand, we are facing a very difficult situation. So explain it to me, Mom. The truth this time." She glanced toward the doorway, then lowered her voice. "Your father has mortgaged everything, the house, my inheritance from my parents, our retirement funds. If these projects don't start generating returns very soon, we'll lose it all." For a moment, her vulnerability seemed genuine, and I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then she continued, "That's why we need your inheritance, Sophie. It's the only way to save the family." And there it was. Not, "We need your help," or, "We need your business expertise," but, "We need your inheritance," as if the money were already theirs to claim. "I need some time to think," I said, taking my tea and retreating to my room. That night, I carefully examined the documents Leonard had left, photographing key pages with my phone. The legal language was dense, but the intent was clear. Upon my 30th birthday, all assets from my grandfather's trust would be immediately transferred to Carter Developments, with me receiving only a minority partnership interest that could be diluted at the board's discretion, a board controlled by my father and brother. In essence, I would hand over my entire inheritance and receive almost nothing in return except the privilege of helping bail out my family's failing business. In my childhood desk drawer, I found an old letter from my grandfather, tucked inside my high school yearbook. The yellowed paper crackled as I unfolded it. "My dear Sophie, by the time you read this, I will likely be gone. I've set aside your portion of the inheritance in a way that protects it from those who might see it as a solution to problems of their own making. Trust your instincts, especially when it comes to family. The Carter determination runs strong in you, but remember that it can be both a blessing and a curse. Love always, Grandpa." I traced his familiar handwriting with my finger, feeling a renewed connection to the man who had seen this coming years ago. The next morning, I made a crucial call to Robert Thompson, my grandfather's former attorney who had established the trust, now retired in Arizona. He sounded surprised to hear from me but quickly grew serious when I explained the situation. "This is exactly what Henry feared," he sighed. "Your father tried to contest the terms of the trust right after Henry died, you know. Wanted all the money consolidated under the family business. Can they access it without my consent?" I asked. "Absolutely not. The trust is ironclad. Only you can authorize any transfer of assets once you turn 30. He added, "In fact, there are additional protections I built in at Henry's insistence. If anyone attempted to coerce or manipulate you regarding the trust, there are provisions that could redirect the assets to charitable foundations instead." A weight lifted from my shoulders. "So they can't force me to sign anything?" "No, they cannot. But, Sophie," his voice grew cautious, "if they're desperate enough to fake a medical emergency, they may be desperate enough for other measures. Be careful." I spent the day playing the role of the dutiful, considering daughter, asking questions about the business that made my family believe I was seriously contemplating their proposal. With each conversation, I gathered more evidence of their financial mismanagement and increasingly desperate situation. By evening, I had pieced together a disturbing picture. Carter Developments had essentially been operating as a Ponzi scheme for the past 2 years, using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors while funding my family's lavish lifestyle. My inheritance was their last hope of avoiding not just bankruptcy but potentially criminal charges for fraud. As I prepared to meet Agnes again to share what I'd learned, Clara knocked on my bedroom door. My sister had always been the family diplomat, the one sent to smooth over difficult situations with her charm and persuasive skills. "Hey," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "want to get out of here for a bit? Shopping, maybe? There's a new boutique downtown that reminds me of your style." The invitation was so transparent I almost laughed, but a girl's day out might provide opportunities for more information. "Sure," I agreed, "that sounds nice." The boutique was exactly what I'd expected, overpriced and uninspiring, but it provided the pretext for lunch afterward at a trendy cafe where Clara could pretend we were just sisters reconnecting. 3 glasses of wine into the meal, her carefully constructed facade began to crack. "You don't know what it's been like," she complained, spinning her empty glass between manicured fingers. "Dad's been impossible, constantly changing plans, making promises to investors he can't keep. And Ethan's no better. He's been siphoning money to his own accounts for months, thinks no one notices." I kept my expression neutral, encouraging her to continue. "That must be stressful." "Stressful? It's a nightmare. Last month, I had to talk Dad out of using Mom's trust fund for a ridiculous marina project. Can you imagine? The only money we have left that isn't tied up in these disasters." "I thought Mom already contributed her inheritance," I said, recalling our kitchen conversation. Clara rolled her eyes. "She told you that? Classic Mom, always playing the martyr." "No, she's kept her trust fund separate." "Smart woman." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between us, I think she's preparing for the worst. She's been moving assets into her maiden name for months." "Interesting. So even my mother didn't fully trust the family business she was pressuring me to invest in. What happens if I don't sign over my inheritance?" I asked casually. Clara's expression darkened. "Don't even joke about that. We're talking bankruptcy, lawsuits, maybe worse. Dad's been dealing with some unorthodox financing sources, people you don't want to disappoint." "Sounds serious." "It is." She grabbed my hand suddenly. "Sophie, I know how this all looks. The way we got you home was wrong, but we're still family. We need to stick together." I squeezed her hand, wondering if there was any genuine concern for me in her plea or if I was simply the solution to their problems. "I'm thinking about it, Clara. I really am." That evening, I met with Lucas, my high school boyfriend who now worked as a financial crimes investigator with the state. We'd reconnected through a carefully worded message that didn't reveal too much but suggested I needed professional advice. He agreed to meet at a coffee shop one town over, where we were unlikely to be recognized. Lucas had grown from a lanky teenager into a broad-shouldered man with serious eyes and a quiet confidence. If he was surprised by my sudden reappearance in his life or my cryptic request, he didn't show it. "So," he said after we'd exchanged brief pleasantries, "what's this about potential financial fraud you wanted to discuss?" Hypothetically, I laid out the situation in general terms without specifically naming my family. Lucas listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed his sharp analytical mind. "Based on what you're describing," he said finally, "we're looking at potential wire fraud, securities fraud, investor deception, and possibly money laundering, depending on the unorthodox financing sources you mentioned." "How serious are we talking?" "Federal charges serious. Years in prison serious." His eyes narrowed. "Sophie, this hypothetical family of yours, they're in deep trouble if even half of what you're describing is accurate. And if someone were aware of these activities but didn't report them, they could be considered an accessory after the fact, particularly if they provided financial support that prolonged the fraudulent activities." He paused. "Are you in danger?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't think so." "Why?" "Because people facing this kind of exposure sometimes make desperate choices." He lowered his voice. "If this is about your family, and I think we both know it is, be careful. Document everything, but watch your back." That night, I created a secure cloud folder and uploaded all the evidence I'd gathered. Photos of documents, recordings of conversations, New Hampshire being a one-party consent state for recording, notes from my conversations with Agnes, Robert Thompson, and Lucas. I also wrote a detailed timeline of events since the fake heart attack call while the details were fresh in my mind. The next morning, Dad announced that a major investor was coming to town in 3 days and needed assurance of new capital, creating an artificial deadline for my decision. The staged urgency was transparent, but it provided a perfect time frame for my counter-strategy. 3 days should be enough, I agreed. I just need to make a few calls to tie up loose ends in Paris. The relief on Dad's face was palpable. He believed I was capitulating. While my family thought I was reluctantly coming around to their plan, I was building a case against them. Agnes introduced me to her nephew, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. For a substantial fee, paid from my emergency credit card, he provided a comprehensive report on the family's hidden assets, offshore accounts in the Bahamas, property under shell companies, and evidence of systematic financial misrepresentation spanning years. With each discovery, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about protecting my inheritance anymore. It was about justice for the community members whose investments had been squandered, the contractors who hadn't been paid, and the employees whose livelihoods were in jeopardy because of my family's greed and mismanagement. Lucas helped connect me with the appropriate regulatory authorities, and Robert Thompson arranged for formal complaints to be filed with multiple agencies, timed to coincide with the deadline my father had established. The evening before I was supposed to sign the papers, the family organized what amounted to an emotional ambush. A gathering of extended family members, all with prepared speeches about Carter family loyalty and the importance of standing together in difficult times. Cousins I hadn't seen in years suddenly appeared. Aunts and uncles made pointed comments about family obligations. And even my mother's normally reserved brother made an appearance to emphasize the Carter legacy. I sat through it all with a polite smile, playing my part as the dutiful daughter considering her family's pleas. When Dad called for a toast to family unity and future prosperity, I raised my glass with the others, all the while knowing that by this time tomorrow, their carefully constructed facade would come crashing down. That night, as the house finally quieted, I sat at my childhood desk and wrote out exactly what I would say the next morning when Leonard arrived with the final documents. The words flowed easily now that I had clarity about what needed to be done. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. Everything in place for tomorrow. Are you sure about this? I thought about my grandfather's letter, about Agnes's unwavering support, about the community members who would lose their savings if the scheme continued. Most of all, I thought about the calculated deception that had brought me home. The fake tears, the imaginary heart attack, the willingness to exploit my love for my father to get what they wanted. I'm sure, I texted back. Time to end this. I woke before dawn on the day of reckoning, my mind surprisingly clear. For a moment, I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the faded glow in the dark stars my father had helped me stick to the ceiling when I was 8. The memory stung. That caring father felt worlds away from the man who had orchestrated this elaborate deception. By 7 a.m., I was dressed in the most professional outfit I'd packed, a charcoal pencil skirt and cream blouse that projected both confidence and seriousness. The house was already stirring, an unusual energy vibrating through the halls. Mom was in the kitchen, arranging pastries on the good china, the one reserved for special occasions. "You're up early," she commented, her eyes assessing my outfit. "And dressed for business. It's a business decision, isn't it?" I replied mildly, pouring myself coffee. She paused, then gave me a tight smile. "It's a family decision. Leonard will be here at 9. Upstairs, I could hear Dad on the phone, his voice carrying that forced jovial tone he used when assuring investors everything was proceeding wonderfully. Ethan was presumably picking up Leonard, and Clara was likely still sleeping off yesterday's wine. With an hour to spare, I walked to the end of our street, where Lucas waited in an unmarked car, engine running. "Last chance to back out," he said as I slid into the passenger seat. I handed him a USB drive containing copies of all the evidence I'd gathered. "Not a chance. Is everyone in position? SEC, FBI, State Financial Crimes Unit, all standing by. They'll move on my signal." His expression grew serious. "Sophie, you understand what this means for your family, right? There's no putting this genie back in the bottle. I know exactly what it means." I thought of the investors who would lose everything if the scheme continued, of the employees who would eventually be left without jobs or pensions when it inevitably collapsed. This isn't just about me anymore. Back at the house, Ethan had returned with Leonard, who was setting up his documents on the dining room table with the precision of a surgeon preparing instruments. Dad stood nearby, a tumbler of bourbon in his hand despite the early hour. Mom was adjusting flower arrangements, a nervous habit from her days as a society hostess. "Where's Clara?" I asked, noticing my sister's absence. "Getting dressed," Mom replied. "She'll be down soon." Dad cleared his throat. "Before we get started with the formalities, Sophie, I want to thank you for thinking this through rationally. I know it was a shock initially, but you've proven yourself a true Carter by putting family first." The irony of his statement might have been amusing under different circumstances. Leonard motioned me to the table. "I've prepared the final transfer documents based on our discussions. Once signed, these will take effect on your 30th birthday, transferring the trust assets directly into Carter Development's accounts." I took the seat opposite him, scanning the papers with deliberate slowness. "I'd like to understand exactly what I'm signing first. Would you mind explaining each document for the record?" I placed my phone on the table, its recorder function already running. Leonard glanced at Dad, who nodded impatiently. "Of course, though it's quite straightforward." As Leonard launched into his explanation, the front doorbell rang. Mom frowned, clearly not expecting visitors. "Who could that be at this hour?" "I'll get it," Ethan offered, but I was already on my feet. "No need. I've got it." I opened the front door to find Robert Thompson, my grandfather's lawyer, flanked by 4 serious-looking individuals in suits. Behind them, Lucas stood with several uniformed officers. "Robert," I said, loud enough for everyone inside to hear, "thank you for coming. Please, all of you, come in." The look on Dad's face as the group filed into our foyer was worth every sleepless night of the past week. Shock giving way to confusion, then dawning horror as badges were displayed and introductions made. "William Carter," one of the suits stepped forward. "I'm Special Agent Laura Bennett with the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises and seize financial records related to Carter Developments." Mom appeared in the doorway, her face draining of color. "What is the meaning of this?" "Mrs. Carter," another agent addressed her, "I'm from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We're investigating allegations of securities fraud, wire fraud, and investor deception." All eyes turned to me, realization dawning in their expressions. "Sophie," Dad's voice was dangerously low, "what have you done?" I met his gaze steadily. "I've done what Grandpa would have expected of me. I've protected his legacy. The real one, not the house of cards you've built." I stepped aside as officers moved past me with their search warrants, heading directly for Dad's study and the company files kept in our basement. "You have no idea what you've done," Dad hissed, his charming facade completely gone now. "Do you think you're some kind of hero? You've just destroyed this family." "No, Dad, you did that when you decided to lie, cheat, and steal, and when you faked a heart attack to manipulate me into funding your fraud." Leonard was trying to gather his papers, but an SEC agent stopped him. "Those documents are potential evidence, sir." Ethan lunged toward me, his face contorted with rage, but Lucas stepped between us. "That would be a very poor decision, Mr. Carter." "You little," Ethan snarled over Lucas's shoulder. "You think you're so smart? You have no idea who you're dealing with, what connections Dad has." "We'll beat this, and when we do..." "That's enough," the FBI agent interrupted. "Mr. Carter, please step back, or we'll have to restrain you." Mom collapsed into a chair, her perfect composure finally cracking. "Sophie, how could you do this to us? We're your family. That's why I had to do it, Mom. Because real family doesn't exploit each other. Real family doesn't lie and manipulate to get what they want." I opened my briefcase and pulled out the folders of evidence I'd compiled. "I found the records of what you did to Aunt Margaret, Dad's sister, the one you told me died of cancer." "She didn't, did she? Dad did the same thing to her that you tried to do to me, only she didn't have anyone to warn her." Dad's face went pale. "Who told you about Margaret?" "Public records are amazing things," I replied, "so are death certificates that list suicide as cause of death, not cancer, and old news articles about sisters contesting wills and losing everything." Clara appeared on the stairs, still in her robe, gaping at the scene below. "What's happening?" "Your sister has decided to betray the family," Dad snapped. "No," I corrected him, "I've decided to stop the family from betraying everyone else. Do you know how many people in this town have invested their retirement funds in your projects? How many contractors you've left unpaid? How many employees will lose everything when this all comes crashing down? We could have fixed it with your money, Ethan insisted. One investment, and we would have turned everything around. Like you've turned around the last 3, sure things. I shook my head. This wasn't about saving the business. It was about saving yourselves from the consequences of your actions, and I won't be part of it. As agents continued to search the house, more details of the family's financial crimes emerged. Dad had been running what amounted to a Ponzi scheme for years, using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors while skimming millions for the family's lifestyle. Mom had been complicit, helping to charm wealthy prospects at dinner parties and social events. Ethan had specialized in falsifying financial projections, while Clara managed the web of shell companies that obscured their activities. "William Carter, you're under arrest," Agent Bennett announced, reading him his rights as another officer produced handcuffs. Dad fixed me with a final venomous glare as the cuffs closed around his wrists. "You're no longer my daughter. I stopped being your daughter the moment you saw me as nothing but a solution to your financial problems," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Mom and Ethan were also placed under arrest, their rights read to them as they were led to separate vehicles. Leonard was taken in for questioning, his professional demeanor crumbling as he realized the legal jeopardy he faced for his role in the scheme. Only Clara remained temporarily free, as her involvement appeared less direct than the others. As officers escorted her upstairs to dress before questioning, she paused beside me. "You could have warned me," she whispered, "given me a chance to get out. Like you warned me about what was really happening when you called me in Paris." I countered. "You made your choice, Clara." As the last police car pulled away from our driveway, I stood on the porch with Agnes, who had arrived to offer support. Neighbors had gathered on the street, watching the spectacle with shocked expressions. I knew the local news would be reporting on the arrests by evening, and my family's reputation would be shattered forever. "What will you do now?" Agnes asked gently. I looked at my childhood home, now marked with crime scene tape. "First, I'm going to make sure every victim of their fraud gets as much restitution as possible. Then I'm going back to Paris, to whatever's left of my career." I paused. "Unless you think I'm running away." She squeezed my hand. "I think you're finally free to live your own life, Sophie." That's what Henry would have wanted. The weeks following the arrests were a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and difficult conversations. I worked with the authorities to identify all the victims of my family's fraud, personally meeting with many of them to explain what had happened and the steps being taken to recover their money. My inheritance trust matured as scheduled on my 30th birthday. Working with Robert Thompson, I established a restitution fund for investors and contractors who had been defrauded, using a significant portion of the trust assets while maintaining enough for my future security. The legal case against my family moved swiftly, with overwhelming evidence leading all of them to seek plea agreements rather than face trial. Dad and Ethan received substantial prison sentences for their central roles in the fraud scheme. Mom and Clara negotiated lesser sentences in exchange for cooperation, providing information that helped recover additional hidden assets. Leonard, the family attorney, lost his license to practice law and faced his own criminal charges for his role in facilitating the fraud. 3 months after the arrests, I returned to the county courthouse for my father's sentencing hearing. He refused to look at me as he was led into the courtroom in his orange jumpsuit, handcuffs clinking with each step. The powerful, confident man who had dominated our family was gone, replaced by someone diminished and bitter. When given the opportunity to address the court, Dad finally turned toward me. "I built everything for my family," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Everything I did for them, for the Carter name. My own daughter destroyed that legacy out of spite." The judge was unimpressed. "Mr. Carter, the court has heard testimony from dozens of victims who trusted you with their life savings. You betrayed that trust systematically and repeatedly over many years. Your legacy was built on fraud and deceit, and your daughter showed remarkable courage in bringing that truth to light." Dad received 15 years in federal prison. As he was led away, he refused to meet my eyes one final time. Outside the courthouse, I found myself surrounded by people from town, former neighbors, family friends, and victims of the fraud, many of whom offered quiet thanks for my actions. Some had lost significant amounts in my family's schemes, but most seemed to appreciate that someone had finally stopped the cycle of deception. One elderly couple approached me hesitantly. The woman clutched her purse with gnarled hands, her husband supporting her with a gentle arm around her waist. "You don't know us," the man began, "but we invested our entire retirement with your father 5 years ago. We thought we'd lost everything." "I'm so sorry," I said, the familiar weight of guilt settling over me, even though the crimes weren't mine. "No, dear," the woman interrupted. "We wanted to thank you. The restitution fund you established, we received our first payment last week. It won't replace everything, but it means we can keep our home." Tears pricked my eyes as they moved on, replaced by others with similar stories. Each conversation reinforced that I had made the right choice, despite the cost to my family. As the crowd dispersed, I noticed a familiar figure waiting by a car across the street, Clara, out on bail pending her sentencing. She looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes and none of her usual perfect makeup. I hesitated, then crossed to meet her. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said. "I wasn't sure I'd come," she admitted, "but I needed to see you, to say I'm sorry, for whatever that's worth now." "Why did you go along with it, Clara? You must have known it would all fall apart eventually." She laughed bitterly. "That's the Carter way, isn't it? Keep pushing forward, never admit defeat, and when things go wrong, find someone else to blame." She looked down at her hands. "I've had a lot of time to think lately, about who I became in that house, under Dad's influence. It wasn't who I wanted to be. And who do you want to be now? I don't know yet, but not someone who would hurt others to save herself." She met my eyes directly. "I testified against Dad and Ethan yesterday, told them everything, including the offshore accounts they thought I didn't know about." I nodded, understanding what this admission had cost her. "Good luck with your sentencing, Clara," she called as I turned to leave. "For what it's worth, I really am sorry about the phone call, about Paris." "I know," I said and was surprised to realize I did. 1 year later, I stood in the newly renovated space that had once housed Carter Real Estate's main office. The family name had been removed from the facade, replaced with Community Development Partners, the non-profit I had established with the remainder of my inheritance to help rebuild what my family had damaged. The organization focused on completing abandoned development projects ethically, creating jobs, and investing in sustainable local businesses. A portion of all profits went directly to the continued restitution fund for fraud victims. Agnes had joined the board of directors, along with several respected community leaders and financial ethics experts. Lucas provided occasional consultation on financial compliance, our professional relationship gradually warming into something more personal as the months passed. With the legal proceedings largely concluded, I had finally returned to Paris to salvage what remained of my fashion career. To my surprise, Beatrice had followed the story of my family's fraud and my role in exposing it. Rather than holding my abrupt departure against me, she offered me a partnership opportunity in her new venture, a sustainable fashion line emphasizing ethical production and fair labor practices. "You've proven you have integrity as well as talent," she told me. "That's rarer than you might think in this industry." I divided my time between Paris and New Hampshire, gradually rebuilding my life while helping others rebuild theirs. The media attention around the case eventually faded, though occasional articles about the heiress who took down her family's fraud empire still appeared in financial publications. On a crisp autumn day, I made the difficult journey to the federal women's prison where my mother was serving her 3-year sentence. I hadn't planned to visit, but a brief, surprisingly vulnerable letter from her had arrived at my Paris flat, and something in her words had compelled me to come. The visiting room was institutional and depressing, but Mom had maintained as much of her dignity as possible in her prison uniform, her hair neatly styled, back straight as always. "Sophie," she said, genuine surprise in her voice, "I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I admitted, taking the seat across from her. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes before she finally spoke. "I've had a lot of time to think in here, about the choices I made, the person I became, and I realized I lost sight of what actually mattered." She twisted her hands together, the gesture so uncharacteristic it caught me off guard. I was so focused on maintaining appearances, on the Carter name and reputation, that I justified everything your father did as necessary. It wasn't necessary, Mom. It was greed. Yes, she agreed, surprising me again. For your father, it was. For me, she paused. I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything, of what people would think if they knew we were failing. And that fear made me cruel, especially to you. I thought of the decades of pressure, the criticism of my career choice, the constant implication that I wasn't doing enough for the family. Why was I always the outsider, Mom, even before I moved to Paris? Because you reminded me of who I could have been if I'd had your courage. Her eyes filled with tears, another shocking departure from the controlled woman I'd known. I had dreams once, too, before I married your father. Art school, scholarships I turned down because my parents thought it impractical. I didn't know that. No one did. I buried that part of myself so deeply I almost forgot it existed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When you chose your own path despite our disapproval, it stirred up all those old regrets. It was easier to resent you than to face my own choices. It wasn't an excuse for what she'd done, but it was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. We talked for the remainder of the visiting hour, not resolving everything, that would take years, if it was possible at all, but establishing a tentative foundation for whatever relationship might emerge from the rubble of our past. As I prepared to leave, Mom asked the question I'd been expecting all along. Have you visited your father? No, I said, I don't think I can. She nodded. He wouldn't see you anyway. His pride wouldn't allow it. That sounds like Dad. Sophie, she called as I stood to leave, what you did with the restitution fund, it was the right thing. I want you to know I see that now. 3 years to the day after my family's arrests, I stood on the rooftop terrace of my Paris flat, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in brilliant orange and pink. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucas, who was flying in the next morning to spend a long weekend. Agnes had sent photos of the community garden project our foundation had just completed on what had once been an abandoned Carter Developments property. Clara, recently released from her 14-month sentence, had started working with a prison reform advocacy group, channeling her communication skills into something meaningful. We exchanged cautious but increasingly warm emails every few weeks. Dad and Ethan remained in prison, neither having shown any remorse or made any attempt to contact me. That pain would always be there, a dull ache beneath my ribs when I thought of them, but it no longer defined me. My phone rang. Beatrice, calling from the studio where final preparations were underway for our collection's debut at Paris Fashion Week. We've got a problem with the closing piece, she said without preamble. I need you here. On my way, I replied, already reaching for my coat. As I stepped out into the Paris evening, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for so long. The inheritance my grandfather had protected for me had ultimately served a greater purpose than he could have imagined, helping to right the wrongs committed in our family name. I had lost the family I was born into but found the strength to build something new from the ashes, a life of purpose, integrity, and genuine connection. And perhaps that was the true legacy my grandfather had wanted for me all along. What would you do if those closest to you, who ought to cherish you, attempted to take all you have? Would you pardon them or push back? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this tale of familial deceit and satisfying retribution struck a chord, give it a thumbs up and follow for more gripping real-life stories every day.